Hi everyone, welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Athena Film Festival and to this masterclass on writing for television. My name is Willa, I'm a senior at Barnard. I worked for the Athena Film Festival 2 years ago and I'm currently interning with the center. On behalf of the Athena Center for Leadership Studies and Women in Hollywood, I want to thank everybody for coming. So this festival could not have been possible without the help of our amazing sponsors. As you've been waiting, you've seen the names of our sponsors and honorary host committee rolling on screen, and I want to give a huge thank you to all of them. I want to first acknowledge our founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina Scully. And I also want to acknowledge our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, who supports films and programs about women in STEM. And lastly, I want to thank the Stevens College Low Residency Program in MFA in Television and Screenwriting. And so to kick us off, I'm going to introduce television writer Ken Lezepnik, who is the founder and former director of the Stevens College program. And he's going to introduce Valerie, followed by a conversation about writing for TV. And then at the end, we're going to take some questions from the audience. Tickets are still available for panels and screenings, starting today at 3 and all day tomorrow. So I hope you'll come through for them. Thank you for coming to this program and enjoy.
Thank you, Willa. It's so great to be here, and what an incredible treat for me to be here with my very good friend, Valerie Woods. We've been friends since we were both writers on the TV show Touched by an Angel, and have remained friends ever since, and she has had a remarkable career, including, by the way, she is one of our ongoing mentors for the Stevens College MFA in TV and Screenwriting. I have flyers. I can tell you about it after the presentation. Happy to do so. But I will say our program, which has the mission of getting more women writing for film and television, based in Los Angeles, a low residency MFA, uses working writers as mentors. And amazingly enough, it's just part of the program. The co-executive producer of Queen Sugar these past couple of years continues to teach for us. So she's like in a writer's room, and then she's also teaching our students. So briefly, Valerie is a novelist, a television writer. She has been very important in the Sid Fields as a, what is the actual name? Sorry, now I'm blowing my introduction. Thank you. The Art of Visual Storytelling for Sid Fields. She's a mentor to the Stevens College students. The past 2 years, she's been the co-executive producer of Queen Sugar. 1 year, okay. And she is currently writing and co-executive producing a Netflix show that I cannot tell you about. So please welcome Valerie Woods. Yes, we couldn't talk about that. So when Valerie and I were on the phone and said, all right, this is great, we got a chance to talk to Valerie, the amazing synchronicity that unfolded was, she said, you know, it's interesting, I just got the right, well, I should let you tell this story. I just got the rights to do a very important figure.
So a very good friend of mine named Valerie Boyd, and I have to mention her name because I forgot in another interview, wrote a wonderful book, and it's called Wrapped in Rainbows, The Life of Zora Neale Hurston. And I love Valerie, and I love this book, and I've been wanting to option it ever since it was published. I knew Valerie while she was writing it for years. I said, book done yet? And, which you should never say to a writer, but I did. And I finally got the resources to option her book just a few months ago, and I'm pitching it as a limited series, 6 to 8 episodes, to explore the wonderful life of Zora. And Zora was the first Black woman to graduate from Barnard. class of 28. So it's like, wow, guess where I'm going to be? Who knew? Who knew? Synchronicity again.
We were sort of hoping in past years the Stevens MFA discussion has taken place in Barnard Hall, and we said, we'll be in the exact rooms that she's walked through, and so obviously this
We're not
isn't.
there.
Yeah, we're not. But maybe for those who aren't as familiar, you could share some of the life she led. Just like, she's such an amazing figure, anthropologist, playwright, author. Talk us through why you were so fascinated with Zora.
How much time do we have? What's fascinating about Zora is we first think of her as the Harlem Renaissance, and she was a key figure during the Harlem Renaissance, but you know, that was only about a 5-year span of the Renaissance, and her career spanned a lot of years. And her greatest works were written in the 30s, in the mid-30s, not in the 20s. And so she was a child of the South and very proudly an advocate of the South. They call her the genius of the South. And she grew up in the first all-black incorporated town of Eatonville, Florida. And she always wanted to see what was on the other side of the horizon. And that's what she grew up to do. Her father, of course, she was the second daughter, and he was like, why can't you be like your sister and get married and stuff? And she's like, because I have plans, thank you. And her mother, though, gave her the advice to always jump at the sun. You may not get there, but you'll get off the ground. And on her deathbed, her mother, who had a very tumultuous marriage to her father, who was a pastor, he was the mayor of Eatonville 3 times, she said, never love anyone better than you love yourself. And Zora took that to heart because people kept trying to box her in. She got married 3 times, each one progressively shorter. Because each of these men, and the love of her life, who was, she modeled tea cake in Their Eyes Were Watching God on Percy, wanted her to like settle down and be there for them. And she said, why do I have to compromise my ambition, my dreams, what I want to do? Her first husband, she says, I was not cut out to be a doctor's wife in the community. She was on the road with her notebooks, her Sassy Susie car, and a pistol, because, you know, she was doing the back roads of the South. And her brother said, no, don't do trains because of Jim Crow. Don't want you abandoned in the middle of nowhere or riding in a cattle car. And so she was a road warrior, and she discovered anthropology while here at Barnard, and she wanted to document African-American culture because no one else, it was valuable to her. Having grown up in Eatonville, she knew that there was a lot of culture being overlooked, and she wanted to document it because Black stories matter. She even said in a letter to County Cullen, Black Lives Matter, back then. And she was going to document that. And she loved her people. She loved our culture. She went to the Caribbean and New Orleans. She apprenticed with a hoodoo doctor in New Orleans and came very close to being a priestess herself and decided, don't play with this. This is real. And she documented that in her book of Mules and Men, and I still can't forget that she wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God in 6 weeks. I have a project that I've been working on for a couple of years now. And it's amazing, but that came out of her own experience. It was after she broke up with Tea Cake in real life. And it was that determination to live, as Oprah Winfrey calls it, her best life. And so I call her the Indiana Jones of anthropology because she was in one scrape after another and on the road all the time. And her writing and her political views, which, you know, her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, was published just as World War II was starting. And she had some things to say about the Roosevelt administration. And her publisher said, not time to put that in a book just when we need to bring the nation together. So a lot of her views were edited from her biography, her autobiography, because she was not shy about her opinions. And so she's just a woman of our time. And Alice Walker rediscovered her in the 70s. And the story about her is, oh, poor Zora, she died alone and broke and in an unmarked grave. And no one says that about Langston Hughes, who had like $8 in his pocket when he died. But the way we characterize women and whether they were a success or not based on whether they were married or if they had children or how much money they had. Yes, she was single, and she was living in a house in Fort Pierce, Florida, had the most gorgeous garden and vegetable garden in town people would stop and take pictures of. The community loved her and took care of her. At her funeral, they had to put seating outside for the people who wanted to come and honor her. But no, she was alone and broke and books out of print. So when I looked at the current presidential field and how we characterize the women running for president, oh, what are you going to do? You're about to be a grandmother. How can you be president? Hello? Have you asked any of her men that question? So we still do that. And she was fighting against that all during her life. And we're still doing that today. So even though it's the past, it's the present.
Wonderful. Maybe to talk a little bit about the writer's craft of this project. Mm-hmm. So there it is. You have this biography, very complete biography.
Yeah.
You've, I believe, have made a choice. You could have said, you know what, I'm going to write this as a screenplay. Mm-hmm. But instead, you've chosen to go down this path of limited series. What was, just as a writer, like what went into that decision-making process or that thinking about why this would play out better?
Movies are great. I saw Harriet twice. It was wonderful. But again, it's a life that's so large, a movie can only do so much. You can only tell so much of the story. And a limited series and streaming and the platforms available today are really ripe for something like this. As you may know, there's March 20th, Madam C.J. Walker, Self-Made, on Netflix, executive produced by a former colleague of mine. And so limited series are a thing. There's a market because, of course, I want to tell this story and I want to tell it well, and it's looking from a producer's eye, well, what would be the best market for this? And Genius has 2 successful series and is currently doing Aretha Franklin, and those are 10 episodes, I believe. So that kind of platform is ripe for this moment. And we get to tell a lot about Zora and tell a full, complete story.
Yeah. And I'm curious, again, just sort of writer's point of view. So as you pitch this, how do you lead that pitch? Like, how do you start? We just heard your pitch, kind of? Or
yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right.
I haven't yet pitched to anyone who didn't love the story. The only question is, well, budget. Who has the budget for that? You don't want to shortchange it. And someone like a Netflix or an Amazon or a network, if I haven't yet pitched a network yet, they have the funds to do it justice. A show like this could need a budget of $5 to $8 million an hour because it's period. And if you do several periods, you have to do the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, she passed in 1960. So vintage cars, vintage clothes, finding locations, all that adds to budget. So you have to think about that as you're creating and who you pitch to and who's going to be able to afford to do it justice.
And of course, writing period, nothing new for you. You've done this in a couple of contexts. Any Day Now, right? Maybe people know the show Any Day Now. Oh, you got to tell them about Any Day Now.
So Any Day Now was Lifetime's actual first dramatic series when they changed their format. It starred Annie Potts and Lorraine Toussaint, two friends who grew up in the South in Birmingham, Alabama. I see some heads, yeah. Oh, great, thank you. And 60% was present day, 40% was in the past. And with them as little girls. And the unlikely friendship they had as children in civil rights South. And I have to, Nancy Miller, who created that show and had that idea, pitched that show for 6 years. And everybody said no. And she was pitching it as a half hour. And she always got two questions. The first was, do they have to be girls? And she said, yes. And then they said, well, does it have to be like civil rights? And she's like, yes. And because it was a white girl, black girl, Birmingham, 60s, how did they become friends? So she said, yes, it has to be both of those things, and she got turned down for 6 years, every time pitching season came. And then Lifetime decided they wanted to do 1 hour drama. We love that it's girls. We love the issues that will come up, and we think it should be a 1 hour show because Nancy was just pitching it for the girls in the 60s. And they said, we want to know what happened when they grew up. And we can split them. And this is what a network, a creative network, and creative executives can give to a show idea, because it is a collaborative process. And you hopefully get executives who are creative. And Nancy said, love that idea, and that's how Any Day Now was born. And we're very happy to be on it.
And that's so refreshing to hear, because so often, the writer's stories are, oh, the enemy is the network. And it doesn't have to be that way. That it can be a creative and collaborative process.
And that's the way it is, of course, on Queen Sugar. Oprah Winfrey Network, and Miss Winfrey herself, who did Their Eyes Were Watching God back in, I think, 2006. Very collaborative process. She got the rights to this book, Queen Sugar, and she had just worked as executive producer with Ava on Selma. And it's like, hey, what do you think? And this is a great story. Ava DuVernay has told this story, so I'm not speaking out of school. She said it in public. She turned in her first draft of Queen Sugar, and Miss Winfrey was like, this is good. This is good. And Ava said, yeah, I really captured the book, right? She said, yes, you did, but I wanted more. And she's like, okay, so she did a second draft. And she threw in all kinds of stuff like voodoo practices and wild parties in New Orleans and all kinds, everything she wanted to do. And Miss Winfrey was like, well, okay, that's a little too much. And Ava said, okay, one more time. And here is what the executive said to the writer. What are the things that matter to you that you want to write about using this book as a foundation? And the third draft is what we've seen on screen for the last 4 seasons, going into 5 seasons. She took that book as a foundation and added a character. If you're familiar with the show, Nova Bordelon does not exist in the book. But Nova is a journalist and activist, and Ava wants to talk about things. In the book, Micah is a girl, not a boy, but she wanted to write about privileged black men and their challenges in a world that is still discriminating against black men. In the book, Charlie was a widow. But on the show, she's married to an NBA basketball player who was in a scandal, a sex scandal. She wanted to write about those. So she kept the flavor of the themes that the original author had and worked with her. She said that was one of her most difficult. So Charlie's not a widow anymore, telling the author, okay. And Micah's a boy, and I've added a character, and the author recognized, and this collaboration worked as well when you're working with a novelist, she knew that if you wanted a series that was going to last more than 8 episodes, you were going to have to go outside the book. And so she understood where she was taking her characters. And what was most important was the land, and about African Americans being landowners, especially in the South, because so much land had been taken away. So that's the heart of the novel, and it's the heart of the series. And so that gave her a canvas to create all kinds of stories that will last as long as they keep renewing the show.
Great. And now that we're on to Queen Sugar, yesterday in the Athena Writers alum gathering, there was Teresa Rebeck and was telling some stories about writers' rooms. And I think maybe I'd love to, because I love that your experience in the Queen Sugar room, obviously you're the co-EP, but has been a positive, collaborative, and I just love for you to talk a little bit about how that process works, how you break stories in that writer's room, what the writing process looks like. Can you share something?
Absolutely. And it's interesting, I got a phone call one Saturday afternoon. I hadn't been on a show in a while. And it was from the showrunner. Well, actually, I got an email that said, hey, we've met socially a couple of times and I've heard great things about you. And would you be interested in meeting and submitting for a high-level position on Queen Sugar? And I'm like, yes, please. I had a writing sample that, an adaptation of a screenplay that I adapted with Felicia Rashad. She optioned a novel that takes place in the 60s and in Philly, and I had adapted that, so I sent that screenplay. And that afternoon, Anthony writes back. Anthony Sparks is the showrunner for Queen Sugar. And he says, oh, this is great. It's almost, the same themes like we have on Queen Sugar. Can you meet on Monday? And this was a Saturday. I met with him on Saturday. And on Monday, and we talked and laughed, and he said, listen, I'm not the final word. Ava DuVernay is the final. She was filming When They See Us in New York, here in New York. I'm in New York, right? Okay, so he's going to arrange a call for us. And I was not used to carrying my phone with me everywhere. So, of course, the one day I leave my phone unattended is when I get a call. And there's a message. Hi, this is Ava DuVernay, and I'd like to talk to you. I'm like, however, I do now have saved that message. So, and I call her back, and we eventually connected. She was on set, and we talked, and we were having a good conversation, and she was talking about the role of a co-executive producer in a room, which is like the lieutenant to the captain. The co-EP, I had been co-EP on Any Day Now, and how to do that and what was needed on the show. But then she got called to set after about 10 minutes. She says, oh, we'll rearrange and get another call. I said, okay. And then I remembered after I hung up that I had been to a panel with Ms. DuVernay, and someone asked her, what's the best way to go into an interview? And her advice was, be the one. Don't go into a room thinking, oh, please, can I be part of your team? She gave the example of when she was looking for a personal assistant. And she was interviewing, and she found herself waking up in the morning going, please let this be the one. Please let this be the one. She said, when you go in a room, realize they want you to be the one, because they don't want to interview anymore. So be the one. Walk in knowing what you have to offer and how you can support them. Don't go in telling them what they need to do on their show. Go in saying, here's me. I'm the one. I remembered that, and I texted her back, and I said, you know, you're busy. And I just wanted to talk about something we were talking. I've done this job. I know how this works because, you know, I love being in a room because a lot of people don't want to be in a room. They want to run the show. They don't want to be the co-EP if they're at that level. And I said, being in a room helps me be a better writer, et cetera, et cetera. Thanks for taking the time. Next text. You're terrific. Welcome to the team. Warner Horizon should be calling you. Blah, blah. And I'm like, thanks. Be the one. And, you know, it's not about being arrogant or being cocky or anything. It's just, this is me. This is what I do. This is what I've done. I can do this. So I took her advice, and I was
That's fantastic.
the one. So season 4 was great. Now, Ava was not in the room all the time. Anthony Sparks, the showrunner, who's the only writer who's been on that show since season 1. Because one of the things that Ava DuVernay does, as you know, is give opportunity. You know, we have first-time TV directors every season, and the writing staff changes every season. Not the entire staff, but different roles. And she was giving the showrunner role, a different showrunner every season. But Anthony had been on since season 1, and they were all women. And she said it was Anthony's turn. I mean, I could not have him be the showrunner. And he's the first showrunner to come back. And he's the showrunner for season 5, because season 4, I think, was a great season. Anybody here see season 4 with Nova and all of her stuff? Watch it, it's on now. And so in the room, it's Anthony, who is in constant contact with Ava, who's the creator. And they know how they want the season to go. So he has a mandate, and he's selected the room, and last season was the first season that it was entirely a room of people of color, and male and female, and stray and gay. Did I say stray? Straight and gay. And it was, yeah, pretty stray. So we had a great room, great story. And it's like we start, and it's the same on this other show I'm on and in most rooms. If you're coming in after the first season, you know where you left off in the previous season. And you go by character, your main characters, and you go, this is where we left this character at the end of the season. Where do we want them to go in this season? And you list all your characters. Generally, they have a different card color. And you just say, we know that we want them to end up here. How are we going to get them from here to here in 13 episodes? What are they going to explore, discover, learn emotionally? So you do the characters first. And then you go and look at how they interact with each other. Because if this person's journey is about transparency and openness, and this character is about privacy and not telling tales out of school, where do they come in conflict? And then when you decide those things, then you go to plot. You don't start with plot. Well, some shows have to start with, this is a character-driven show. And then you start deciding, well, we're going to accomplish that in this arena. And what's going to happen, like for Queen Sugar, what's going to happen with the farm? What's going to happen with the mill? What's going to happen with relationships? Is the marriage going to work? Are they going to get married? Are they going to be back together? All those things. To accomplish a character arc, not necessarily to accomplish a plot-driven story. And we're in the room, generally, most shows are 10 to 6, 1 hour, much more civilized than comedy. You can be, comedy rooms I would not even dare to be in. One, I'm not a comedy writer. Why? Because you have to be funny, and it's competitive, and it's like, that's not funny. Be quiet. It's this. Comedy is hard. Anybody, what's that line? Living is easy.
Dying is easy, comedy is hard.
This is true. This is true. Who said that?
Not even sure anymore. Oh, you know what? I think it was someone like
George Burns or somebody?
Yeah, or Montaigne or someone, or I don't know. It's
Somebody,
an old saying.
It's an old saying, and it's true. And their hours are crazy. So, fortunately, Anthony was a happily married man with a growing family. He says, I want to go home. I like my family. So we're going to be out of here by 6 most days. Some days we weren't, but most days we were out by 6. And on the current show I'm on, we're out 5:30, 6 o'clock. So, but then there's traffic. But that's okay. So we make up stuff in the room.
Yeah. And going back to the character notion, then you said the way the characters interact with each other. I've heard you talk about approaching an episode, I have this right, or a series, from the viewpoint of what constellation of characteristics constitute our hero, and then how each character.
Yeah.
You know what I'm getting at? Yeah.
Yeah.
You can explain it better than I can.
I was a Disney fellow, and the great thing about the Disney team is they keep in touch with you over the years, and they have different workshops and webinars and things like that.
Maybe just because there may be people out here who might be interested in this. Could you just quickly what the ABC Disney Fellowship is?
Now it's just Disney.
Oh, it's just Disney.
It's gone back to just being Disney because they bought everybody. So, and it's a fellowship. You submit scripts, and it's all TV now. It used to be film and TV. And they have a submission period. They pay you, I think it's up to $60,000, maybe $75,000 if you get selected. And then they try to place you on their shows, which are now everybody. And so there was a webinar where they were talking about the show Frasier. And it's like, you might think that, oh, we have the quirky character, then we have the sexy character, and then we have... But really, the structure of that show, your main character is Frasier, whom you know from a previous series. And what is Frasier? Frasier is an intellectual. He's, kind of a snob. He's kind of repressed, a bit of a snob and things like that. So when you look at that character, who do you surround them with? So you look at Frasier. What is the opposite of Frasier? Who's this intellectual snob New York guy? His dad. So we're going to create a character that's the opposite of him. What's the extreme of him? Niles. If he is kind of repressed sexually, who's the sexual character? One of the other women. Roz. And if he's smart, who's not so smart? Or not considered smart? That's Daphne. So it's not like, oh, we need a quirky character. No, we need the opposite of our main character. So when you look at your main character, who will they naturally come into conflict with? And again, that's a comedy, so of course it's dependent on situational stuff. It's like with, and you need to know your character so well. What's the one with the scientists? Big Bang Theory. The tagline, Sheldon goes to the DMV to get his driver's license. Okay, that's going to be a mess, because you know Sheldon. And putting him in the DMV is going to be a problem. And in fact, I think he came into contact with Octavia Spencer in that episode. Yes, he did. So when you're looking at your characters and you're creating a show, you always need the conflict. Sid Field, who wrote the book Screenplay, I don't know if I'm going to get it right, but he says all drama is conflict. Without conflict, you have no character. Without character, you have no story. And without story, you have no screenplay. So start there. And it's also, everybody has great ideas. But do they have a story? Two different things. And when you get a great idea, create the story that goes around it. And that's what will sell. And that is what is going to last. And I have to say, I love the British model of television in that 6 episodes, you're done. Or 10, and maybe there'll be another season if you have more story. As opposed to the old model in television of, can I get 100 episodes out of that? Which was all based on reruns and going and being, what's syndication? You needed 100 episodes for syndication. That might still be true in network, but not with streaming.
Right, and it does seem as though the advent of streaming and binge watching and creating series like you will do with your Zora piece changes the nature of the writer's job as storytellers, because the old network model is essentially audiences tune in to see this friend that they know exactly how that friend's going to behave, and the characters don't really change.
Right.
They can change incrementally over the years, but you don't want to, jump the shark and have your lead character suddenly change in such a radical way that it's no longer the show. Right. You have a bottle that gets poured into, and you can try pouring different wine into the bottle, but the bottle is always going to be the same.
Right.
And it seems as though, for instance, what you're doing now with Zora, it's a very different model because the character does experience life and vicissitudes and changes, and it affects how you write.
And she essentially tries to change, but essentially has to remain with her own truth. So she tries marriage, and it's not true to her truth. The world was not designed for her. And who she was, and she refused to compromise. And she kept bumping up against these things. She got great criticism, not only, one of her biggest critics was Richard Wright, who criticized Their Eyes Were Watching God, that she betrayed her education by writing in dialect. And again, a woman's life and her choices and her loves, how was that important? Write about, oppression and write about all these things. And in response, she said, can't the Black poet write about rainbows? Or must they always write about lynching? And so she wrote about people and their interactions and their foibles and those things, and she wrote in the language of the South and refused to change. Just last year, they published Barracoon, the story of the last slave cargo. When she wrote it, the publishers were encouraging her to not use dialect and to smooth out the language and everything, and she refused. She put it on a shelf and would not allow it to be published. It came out last year to great fanfare and review. So they tried to change her, and she refused to change.
Then you've hit upon something that's always been fascinating to me as a writer, because almost every, and as teachers, as fellow teachers of screenwriting, the common aphorism is, does your hero undergo a journey? Does your hero, face obstacles? Does your hero change? Does your hero change a lot by the end of the screenplay? That's accepted wisdom, but there's the contrarian view that Tennessee Williams held, which is people don't change. People are who they are, and that what an audience sees is someone like Blanche Dubois go through the fires of people operating on her, and that our catharsis comes from seeing the flames, from seeing this person who doesn't change. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you're describing Zora as that Tennessee Williams view of somebody who doesn't change, but our catharsis will come from seeing her forge ahead.
And that doesn't mean she doesn't grow in wisdom, in understanding. I think we all have an essential truth, and her moral compass was very strong. She was almost crushed by an incident in her life when she was falsely accused of molesting a child from a disgruntled landlady. And she was in Honduras I got a passport that shows I wasn't even here. And she was totally exonerated, especially when the boys who had been experimenting with each other had lied because they didn't want to get in trouble. But the press around it nearly crushed her. And people weren't really believing, or they wanted her to be pressed down. And then her reclamation was a woman, Ruby McCollum, who was accused of murdering her lover, a black woman, and she was doing the reporting on her trial. Again, she had an understanding of how women are represented, and to her it was self-defense. But of course, the black woman had killed her white lover, who was a doctor, and they were determined to put her in an electric chair. But through Zora's reporting, she was convicted, but she was life in prison in a psychiatric hospital. So she literally saved that woman's life. And that in turn saved her life. She reclaimed her space. And it's a very layered existence of trying to be true to your literary heart in a world that really puts women's thoughts, feelings, lives in second position. Even to this day. I was just reading about the Booker man, Irish author. I'm blanking on her name, but anyway, she, same thing. There were all these male literary figures, and women now in Ireland are now ascending. So it's a story told often.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question just about Queen Sugar. I don't know what time it is.
There is no time.
Okay, there is no time. Our clocks are off. And then open it up for questions. So I want to know people have questions. So I'm just curious, the very specific role of co-EP, which you were talking about a little bit, could you just walk us through, I know there's no typical day, but a typical day. Like, how does your day play out when you're in that room?
Well, you're the second in command as co-EP, and you get a mandate pretty much from your showrunner of what we're going to accomplish that day. An executive producer has many, many hats to wear. Casting, wardrobe, hiring, production, all kinds of questions. So often your showrunner may be in a meeting with the network, or may be in the meeting with the studio, or an actor who's not happy, or who's not whatever. So your job as the co-EP is to keep the room running. Make sure stories get told, the stories get beat out. And you run the writer's room. And it's, you take on that responsibility, and also in production, depending on the show, you're on set producing that episode, and it's like, directors are the guests in television, and the showrunner and the creator on Queen Sugar, who's a director, gives the director a lot of freedom, but still, the writers know the story. So a director may have an idea about something, and it's like, but down the road, that's going to overshadow that. Because they don't, for this show, all the scripts, we don't have all the scripts before we shoot. We don't have final scripts. We have drafts, and stories change. We could have written something, and it's like, ooh, we're not going to do that, by the way. But we wrote it. Come on. We spent hours in the room going over that. So in every room, you have all these cards of ideas that you've come up with over the year, and then there's a separate wall of lost plots or characters that you pitched that didn't quite make it, And that's for season 6. That's never going to happen. In fact, as a showrunner, you have to know the vision of your show. Like Nancy Miller, who knew it had to be girls, it had to be this. And then when you're in the room, we had a writer who pitched an idea. For those of you who remember, the teenage daughter of Annie Potts was dating a Johnny, a young black man. And this writer, a male writer, came in the room. He said, I got an idea. Hear me out. So Johnny and gosh, I can't remember her name. They have a fight, and it gets physical, and he hits her. And Nancy said, no. He said, no, hear me out. We can redeem him. She said, no, you can't. And he says, no, you can. I mean, and she says, no. She was very firm and said, I am not going to have that on my show. I'm not going to have a black man hitting a white woman on my show. It's just not happening. And he kept trying, and finally, it was like, Mark, be quiet. Oop.
Don't IMDb.
You don't know who that is. It's like, stop. The showrunner has spoken. And when the showrunner says no, it means no. And as a co-EP, my role is to follow. When you're on a TV show, there was a show that will remain nameless that I wasn't really thrilled about working on, because I don't look at my IMDb. And a very wise friend, Michelle Shea, theater director, actress, Tony nominee, said, Valerie, your job is not to judge whether a show is good or not. Your job is to bring your skill to that show. That's it. And when you're a writer on a TV show that's not your vision, your job is to bring your skill to serve the creator's vision, not change their show. And that's what they're looking for in a writer when you're being hired. It's not that your voice has to match them. And it used to be that you submitted spec scripts of other TV shows, never a pilot of an original pilot. Now, many showrunners either want an original screenplay or an original pilot because they want to know what your voice is. And not because your voice matches their show, but your voice can enhance their show. And that's what they're looking for. So whatever you write on spec, your pilots or your original ideas, ensure that that is you speaking. That is what you want to project, because that will get you on a show that will use that voice. And the showrunner is saying, yeah, I like that attitude. I want that attitude on my show. And then use that to enhance their show until you get your own, and then you call the shots.
Yeah. Great. Questions in the audience? Yeah, right down here.
I've read
I'll repeat the question so we can all hear.
I read this person's story, the last
Slave cargo.
and last year, and it was wonderful. And I love the fact that she used
Dialect.
And I also read the criticism and accusations of plagiarism.
Mm-hmm.
And now that you've explained that she was told and document what she had read. So it makes sense to me that she found some of these sources, because I went and looked, I compared what the passages that were, I was an English professor, I found the passages where she was accused of plagiarizing, and I think that one could argue that she was doing the research, and then when she was told, we're not gonna publish this unless you remove the dialect, and she said, I'm not gonna remove the dialect, so she shelved it. She didn't go back to paraphrase what she had found in others' work. And so when somebody else found this, they pulled it and they published it as it was, without realizing that she hadn't finished it.
So the question or the information was just about that on the recently published Zora Neale Hurston story that some people cited she drew material from other sources without.
I recommend you read Wrapped in Rainbows, because Valerie Boyd researched that very well, and it's complicated. I can't explain it all right now, but Wrapped in Rainbows, The Life of Zora Neale Hurston. And there's a lot of politics going on during that period, as far as who's telling what story or who has a sponsor who wants certain things. And a lot of people were trying to get that story first. So I would recommend read Valerie's books. Shameless
A pitch for her book.
Pitch for Valerie's book.
Great. Other questions? Oh, we have a bunch. Go maybe right front row, then we'll go into the back.
I just had a question, because I know that in the writer's room and TV, you do the characters first and then the plot. Do you feel like when you do that, is the same way in film, or does it kind of come naturally with like the plot and the characters kind of come together doing film? Yeah.
I always start with character first, whether film or TV, because we're going to see the movie for the person, unless you're doing Mission Impossible, which is totally legitimate, you know? A movie that blended two things perfectly was Black Panther. I mean, of course, it was comic book, it was this and that, but the people were three-dimensional, and you always want to do that no matter what you're doing. Any action movie, which depends on the action, is 100% better when the characters are three-dimensional too. And that's why that was such a success.
Great. We have front row, or, well, yeah, and then there and there. I don't know.
So specifically with episodic television, so take Zora, for example, and one of the things that you wanted to write about was that our heroes sometimes lose their courage, you know, in real life. Thinking about your arc of, 8 episodes or something, would you have her lose her courage for one episode, or like, how do you think about that as a TV writer? Like, obviously you want to be true to the character, but if you think about real heroes, they have real moments when they would really rather not be a hero. So how would you as a TV writer think about, how do I integrate that into my script? Because I think that's a huge message for young women to see about heroes.
Because she lives such a full life, we can do that in every episode. We can take her, and it's episodic, which helps us, in that we can take a segment, we can take a period, and we can devote the hour to that, which is why I want to do a limited series as opposed to a film. A film would have a straight trajectory, which is important.
Yeah, like in Hearing It, it was a straight trajectory, and I know that there were moments.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it's selecting them, though. That's going to be fascinating.
Great. I know we had the gentleman and then down there, but the.
Okay.
And then the woman here.
And then
Yeah,
there.
it's a little bit of what she was talking about, but the limited series, difference between, you know, the movie, as you said, it's a shorter story, more linear. TV show would be the same character in the same kind of engine. You're going there to look at the same thing every episode and how the characters interact. With the limited series, how much of a balance is there? It's almost like, I don't want to say a new genre or a new way to tell the story, but it has different elements from both sides of that, and how would you look at it?
Well, you look at what the train is. This is a phrase I learned in my years. What is the train that's driving your character from beginning to end, and what is the theme for each hour. And so you look at those arcs of Shots Fired was a limited series, 10 episodes, Gina Prince Bythewood. And she never called it a series, and she never called them episodes. It was a 10-hour movie. And so, and she didn't want a second season. She said, no, this is the 10-hour movie. They couldn't use the word episode when they were writing. She talked about it at WG Festival. And you structure it like you would structure a movie. What's Act 1? Act 1 is episodes 1, 2, and 3. Act 2 is 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then your resolution. So know what the macro structure of your story is, and then break it down into hours. Build, set up, confrontation, major confrontation. It's all 3-act structure. And then resolution, where are we going to end? So Sid Field has your 4 things you start with a movie, 4 things you start with a limited series. Where does it end? Where does it begin? Where does it take that first shift from setup to confrontation? He called it plot point 1. And then what hour does it shift from confrontation to resolution? And that's plot point 2. When you decide on those 4 things, then you can plot out your limited series, just as you would plot out your movie or your episode.
Great. And then right there.
Hi, and I'm a great admirer. I just want to say hello. I'm so glad you could come. I would like to ask you a question about ensembles. One of the things that I struggle with is having too many characters and needing to embody a lot of social elements. My project I'm working on now occurs in the 70s during war protests and all kinds of stuff going on in the background. So you've got all that going on. So I'm loving what you're telling me about the opposition of your characters and creating your ensemble. But how do you have, and have you ever faced this situation where you've got to reduce your number of characters in order to make sure that you can make it happen?
Well, ensembles, when you look at some of the best, Downton Abbey, ensemble piece, right? What is the primary focus? Downton Abbey. That's the title. The Crown. It's not about Queen Elizabeth. It's about the crown and the responsibilities of the crown and how it impacts everybody in her family. She was one person before she was coronation, and then she was another person after. Position. So what is the foundation of the story that the ensemble revolves around? What is the thematic thing? Downton Abbey was from the sinking of the Titanic through the war, a lot of historical things, but it was that family and how those events impacted them. What's the premise, I guess? The premise part of it and the world in which your characters will live.
So you're suggesting that if there's a very strong premise, the sheer numbers of characters in an ensemble is more manageable.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because
and what do you want your characters to accomplish?
Because I do know that it can be difficult for a reader to pick up a script, and in the first 10 pages you're meeting 10 people. That's a challenge for a reader.
Well, Queen Sugar is an ensemble, and when you look at that pilot, read that pilot, and read any pilot that Shonda Rhimes wrote, because they know how to write TV, okay? And the pilot script is the script you want. That pilot opens, and she introduces the 3 main characters, the siblings. And then she introduces Aunt Vi and Hollywood, and so it was very clear. It was Nova and the very hot boyfriend, and Charlie and her family, and Ra and Ralph Angel and his kid. And they were significant because each of those scenes gave you a capsule of who they were and what their story was going to be. The pilot script for Scandal, Olivia Pope doesn't even appear in the first 5 pages, but you know about her, and you know how important she is because of the 2 characters who are having this meeting. And then when she shows up, you're ready. I wanted to be a gladiator by page 3, okay? So that is how you, and that's an ensemble piece as well. Who are the primary people who are gonna lead your, as we say, who's number 1 on the call sheet? And 1, 2, and 3 on the call sheet, those are the characters you want to introduce right up front. Thank you so much. Sure.
Great. Guess right here.
Oh, sure. Hi. I live in New Orleans, and my wife is actually from New Iberia, Louisiana.
Okay.
And so I'm just curious, as a TV writer who a lot of times has to be adaptable. I mean, Louisiana is kind of a world apart from the rest of the country, and Acadiana versus New Orleans are a world apart from each other. And I was just curious, how you go about kind of developing the cultural familiarity that it takes to write for a show in a place that's so specific.
Research, research, research. Never shirk your research. And that is basically it. I mean, of course, we had the book as a resource. Research everything you can about New Orleans and New Orleans culture. Fortunately, I came in season 4, so I had 3 seasons to binge so that I could get to know who the characters were. But when you're creating, I've always been interested in Montana and the logging industry. Well, you need to do some research on Montana. The thing, write what you know, refers to what you know, your truths, not necessarily Chicago, even though I did write about Chicago on the South Side. But that's what write what you know means, because you can learn a lot. I mean, my #1 ladies detective agency is written by a Scottish guy, and they were very popular books. So if you don't know it, find it. Google's wonderful. I mean, the internet is wonderful.
Was there a question right here?
Yeah, I do have a question. Can you tell me what a non-writing, thank you. Can you tell me what a non-writing showrunner or EP does in a writer's room?
Exactly. Often the non-writing executive producer may handle the production aspects of the show, the hiring of the crew and things like that. On the show Not to Be Named, we have an executive producer who is a director. And often you'll have a EP director who will direct multiple episodes. They're not necessarily going to be in the writing room, but they're going to create the vision of the show, what it looks like. Sometimes the executive producer, non-writing, is just the person who put the project together and got the studio and the network and all those things, and they get a check every week. Or, Touched by an Angel, John Macias.
Oh, John Macias.
He created the original pilot, and then they scrapped the original pilot and hired Martha Williamson. But John's name is on that credit every week.
He's a writer. He just was non-writing on the show.
He was just a non-writer on that
Because they
show.
let him go.
Yes, so there's any number of roles for a non-writing executive producer. How involved were they in? It's like you can look at Soul Food, for instance, had like 6 executive producers. The people who wrote the movie were executive producers, and then the studio, and they were never in the writer's room. But they were involved in bringing that show together.
Yeah. I feel like I haven't had a chance to see people in the back, but I see there and then I see toward the back. So we'll go there and then in the back. Yeah.
How does sold any work? How would you advise a new writer or somebody who hasn't sold their work to get their screenplay or their pilot in front of somebody to read?
So the question, if you couldn't hear, was if you haven't sold work yet, how do you get that screenplay or pilot in front of somebody who could sell? Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, all right.
Contests, programs like Disney Fellowship. Almost every studio has some kind of program. Screencraft, what's Nickel Fellowship? All of these places where the Blacklist, write your thing and put it in front of people and try that way, and take the route that Ava took herself, and if grants to make a film, make a short, shoot something, get it in a festival. Series Fest. Has anybody heard of Series Fest? Yeah, Kara, you know. Series Fest is what Sundance is to film, Series Fest is for episodic. They're in Denver, Colorado. Recommend, look them up and see what they do. And that's a place where you can take your work. They have screenwriting competitions and workshops and everything. It's in June, I think. Google them. Check them out on the internet.
And if I could suggest a resource, the Writers Guild Library, I don't know if people know this, the Writers Guild Foundation has an extraordinary library in Los Angeles, and now online, they have a tab. So you go to wgfoundation.org. They have a tab on the Foundation Library website that now has this very nice listing and links to the significant fellowships and contests. And there's a lot of contests out there. There's a lot of opportunities. Athena, by the way, fantastic. The Screen Lab here, fantastic. And it's just a great resource to check that out. Seems like we have time for this one last question that was back there.
I was just curious, in the writer's room, how do you work through disagreements between writers? Are you always able to resolve those, or is it inevitable as a writer that you'll have to compromise on parts of your vision?
Well, there is only one vision, and that's the showrunner's vision or the creator's vision. So just like the nameless person who had an idea that the showrunner shot down, you have to let it go. You're not in control. It is their vision, and you're there to offer as many ideas. Some of them will land, some of them will not. And ideally, you have a showrunner who is open. In the last 2 shows I've been on, great showrunner. It's like somebody will say something, and I'm sitting there going, what? But I'm learning from the showrunner. They're like, tell me more about that. Allowing the writer the freedom and the safe environment to express what they're saying, and then going, yeah, but not on this show, not here. Rather than a flat, be quiet. So it really depends on your showrunner. The attitude in the room is showrunner down. If they are rude, if they are abrupt, if they are impatient, it's going to be a difficult room. I've been very fortunate in the majority of the rooms I've been in where the showrunner was really a diplomat in a way that allowed for everyone to express themselves open and freely without fear of reprimand. But as the writer, you have to know, okay, that one didn't fly, let it go, because that's your job.
Great. Well, this has been such a delight. Of course, for me, always a pleasure to talk with you, Valerie. And I will have flyers for Stevens. Thank you, Valerie Woods.